News from NPR coming up next.
Hi everyone, welcome to our third TCAP seminar series of the fall 2012 set. Today we're going to be trying something new with a panel discussion of Dr. Sally Clayshoot, Janet Lewis, and Casey Onweller. I apologize, Dr. Janet Lewis, missed that. And they're all from Bayer Crop Science. They've graciously agreed to come here to talk about their paths into industry and a little bit about their experiences from grad school on through to industry. We did have a poll today, and it looks like most of the people who took our poll as they came into the room are unsure of where they'd like to end up in their career. So I hope that today is informative for you and you all get your questions answered. So Sally, would you like to start with your introduction slide?
Sure, thank you, Catherine. I first thought it might be interesting for everyone if I gave you an overview of Bayer, and so just wanted to have just a few short slides here. So Bayer itself is a company it's based in Germany. It's made up of 3 different business units. Bayer Healthcare, as in Bayer Aspirin, Bayer Crop Science, and that has an ag division, and then Bayer Material Science. And in material science, they do a lot of work with plastics, so Gore-Tex materials and also like the interior of cars are products that they develop. In crop science, there's 3 different business groups. Crop protection, where they do work with insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, and seed treatment. Environmental science, and this includes things for like your dog, and also lawn care. And then bioscience, which is now called seeds, and this is made up of our vegetable seed business, and then also agricultural crops, so cotton, canola, and rice, and then cereals such as wheat and soybeans are new core crops for Bayer. Then we also have traits, and those traits can be found in corn, soy, and cotton. So this just shows you a little bit of kinds of the work that we're doing in the different business areas for crop science. So there's a broad portfolio of products in crop protection. We also have moving into traits, and then we are also very involved in developing germplasm. I wanted to give you an idea of where Bayer is located, and so these are the larger lab facilities that Bayer has around the world, so that you could see it really is a worldwide company. And for us here based in Lincoln, the lab that we'll be using is in Ghent, Belgium. But the cotton business is in Lubbock and also Memphis, and the soy business is in Morrisville out of North Carolina. And our rice business is based in Singapore. Closer to home, these are the areas in North America where we have sites, and you can see that it's pretty much throughout North America, mostly in the South because the Bayer has a large cotton business. However, we're moving more into the Midwest. Another philosophy of Bayer's is cooperation with public institutions, and so we have a long-term agreement to develop non-GM and GM wheat varieties with C. Siro. which is similar to the USDA, only it's based in Australia. We also have collaboration with University of Nebraska, Texas Tech for wheat improvement, Texas Tech for cotton improvement, and then North Carolina State for drought and heat tolerance. And that's all. I thought that would just be a brief overview of the company.
Casey, would you like to start the introductions?
Hi. Hello, I'm Casey Onweller, and I'd like to thank you all for letting us give our talks for the day. I come to Bayer as being a recent graduate from UNL, and before UNL I was a bachelor student at Michigan State University. I've always had agriculture in my background, and I remember hearing about Roundup Ready soybeans and that being my pathway into helping feed the world. Maybe not Roundup Ready, but being a plant breeder. And so that spurred me into my bachelor at Michigan State, because they are a good agricultural school, and then my master's degree here at UNL. And then I moved from my graduating at UNL straight into Bayer, April of 2011. I'm a research specialist or a technician, and I help Janet Lewis, who is our wheat breeder. So today I was planting in the field, and we finished up on Halloween. So, yay!
Yay. Okay, and I'm Janet Lewis, and I'm the winter wheat breeder here at Bayer Crop Science, located in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I did my bachelor's studies at University of Michigan, and I did a degree in botany. And partway through my undergraduate studies, I was doing a bachelor's there, and partway through my undergraduate studies, I kind of got inspired to go into agriculture. Prior to that, I had no plans of going into agriculture. I really wasn't familiar with agricultural sciences, and so I decided to go ahead and finish up my degree at the University of Michigan with botany as my focus, and then focus on going into graduate school in something more agriculturally focused. I went to Michigan State University as a graduate student, did my PhD there in plant breeding and genetics in the wheat breeding program. Following that, I was at the University of Minnesota for 1 year, working in transformation in wheat, looking at fusarium head blight resistance, and then I worked at CIMMYT for 2 years in Mexico, also with fusarium head blight resistance. Then I went back to Michigan State University and was there as a professor, leading the wheat breeding and genetics program, directing that prior to coming here and working with Bayer. So I've had a few experiences going around, but Bayer is my first private company experience, although I've worked in academia as well as seeing nonprofit outside of academia and outside of private industry.
Sally?
And I'm Sally Clayschult, and I went to school at New Mexico State and have a master's and bachelor's there. And I really liked plant genetics because I like to see because it was the applied science, and also just knowing that you're helping the grower. And to me, the whole focus is about adding value to the grower. And right after I finished my master's degree, I started a family, and so I took a few years off. And in this time, we moved from Las Cruces to Wichita, Kansas. And when I started looking at going back to work, there were 4 different wheat breeding companies right there around Wichita, Kansas. So I started first at Trio Research, which was a private company of Jim Wilson's. He was the one who really developed hybrid wheat. Then I went to Hybridtech, which was a company that Monsanto owned, and I worked there for a couple years. Then we moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, and I worked at Cargill for 5.5 years. And then Cargill bought Gertsen Seeds back in Kansas and moved to Kansas. and their wheat group, and I declined to make that move and actually went and started working at Colorado State University for Jim Quick. I worked for Jim until 1998. So that was about 4 years for Jim, and then Scott Haley took over that program, and I worked for Scott until 2005. However, in 2000, I went back to school, and so I worked for Scott and went to school and got my PhD finishing in 2005. And when I finished, there were really no wheat jobs available. It was it was striking at the time. And so I decided I became a cotton breeder for Monsanto down in Phoenix, Arizona. And about 8 months later, Monsanto divested us to buy Delta Pine Land, and Bayer bought us in 2007. Then in 2009, Bayer decided to make wheat a core crop. And because of my wheat experience, they asked me if I would be interested in working as a technical advisor. So I was kind of a cotton breeder by day, a wheat breeder by night. And then in 2010, they offered a full-time position in wheat. And through that, because of that, I ended up moving to Lincoln in the summer of 2010 and really started establishing the regional station here in Lincoln, Nebraska. So currently I manage 3 different stations, one in Lincoln, one in Sabin, Minnesota, which is right outside Fargo, and then one in Saskatoon, which is in Canada, Saskatchewan, Canada. So that's my story.
All right, so as you can see, we've got quite a round of experiences here. We're going to get started with some of the questions that were submitted previously. And I'd like to start with the questions that revolved around skills. And one of the common themes of questions pertain to the fact that a lot of people think there is a different skill set needed for an industry career versus an academic career. So do you believe that there are major differences in the skill sets needed? I don't know, how do you want to start? Sally or?
I guess I don't really think there are. That the important skills for any position is just being flexible and being able to delegate, people management skills, as well as, which I guess some might think those are softer skills, but I mean you need the technical skills, but you also need the other types of skills as well.
So I would agree with Sally. The skills that I had in academia have been quite transferable towards being in a private company, and being able to communicate well, being able to be flexible, being as Sally mentioned, being able to manage other people. There are a lot of soft skills that are very useful anywhere you go, and I think applicants are sometimes, people who are looking for jobs are kind of wondering about the balance of soft skills and technical skills. And I think in school, in public institutions, when people are getting their degrees, they're often focusing on the technical skills and gaining those technical skills. One of the challenges that I think a lot of graduate students have is trying to look for opportunities to acquire more of the soft skills or demonstrate their soft skills. But soft skills and technical skills are both very necessary in both circumstances, and it's not something that's really, the soft skills are not something that's cultured as much in the classroom setting or things like that as much as your technical skills are. So,
kind of leading into that, and I'll ask Casey this, since you've been the most recent graduate student. What were there skills that you felt like you were lacking when you made that transition? Was there something that you felt you needed to catch up on?
We discussed this a little bit, and both Sally and Janet have touched on it, and I would say the people management skills is something that I felt that I hadn't had a whole lot of experience with. I mean, I worked with Dr. Benzinger here at UNL, and he's got a very large group, and so there's a lot of interaction amongst people, but not really me not telling, but directing, I suppose, the other graduate students, because we're all working on our own projects. And then there's a summer crew too, but Steve has his technicians that are in charge of that. So people management was something that I felt needed to be boosted, as I started. And just recently it came to me that my data management skills, how to log everything into an Excel sheet and how to keep consistent across all the different Excel sheets. That's something that I keep racking my brain about and go back like, why did I do it this way? But data management for sure, and people skills.
Okay. Pertaining to skills that job applicants have, is there something that when you see it in a resume, you say that's the one? Are there skills that really set applicants out? It could be definitely what you've already mentioned. Is there anything else?
One thing I think that is important is seeing a good mix of skills. So at least for our company right now, we need people who have practical experience in the field, but that can also understand the molecular portion of things. And so I think, lots of times I see resumes that are really focused in the molecular. And while that's really important for us, we really need to be able to be out in the field and on the ground and, looking at the plants and trying to figure out what's going on in the field and, how are things planted and are they in the right place and, what diseases are coming in and what about the fertility? I mean, all those different factions kind of coming together. So I think it's, for us at least right now, it's really a mix of skills. So.
Something that comes through not necessarily on paper, but might come through in a couple of things that would come through in a personal interview, either in face-to-face or over the phone, that I think are really important are, one would be enthusiasm. Having the ability, knowing that this person is enthusiastic about what they're going to be doing and what they're applying for, and that they really, hopefully that they really enjoy it. Because you put in, especially in plant breeding, there are times of the year that you're putting in long hours and you're in grimy conditions and hot conditions, and you want to know that that person is not just doing a job because they're trying to, just to pay the bills, but that they hopefully have something driving them, that they would enjoy it, and it's not going to be monotonous. It's not going to be a drudgery for them. So an enthusiasm, a passion for what they're doing. And I forgot the other one. There was something else that I thought would come through. Problem solving. Solution-oriented people. That is something that I think as a graduate student I learned. It was a hard lesson. I think a lot of graduate students, as a graduate student, you kind of go in assuming that everything's going to work out just fine. And then my experience has been, and a lot of graduate students' experiences have been, that graduate school is a series of challenges and obstacles to overcome. And you're constant, and learning to overcome obstacles and solve problems day to day, all the things that you're doing is a major skill. And I think oftentimes as graduate students you feel like, oh man, I've had all these problems, but really in some ways you've had a lot of successes because you've gotten past them, you've gotten through them. And as a researcher later on in industry or in academia, if you're in development, you're doing something new, you're always looking for solutions. You're always looking for ways to come through and find different ways of doing things, develop something new. So ability to think creatively, solve problems are tremendous skills to have and communicate with people.
Okay, and that leads into a question that was asked specifically for Casey. I believe this was Sue's question, and she says, in the academic setting, researchers often design and carry out or manage all aspects of whole projects. What are the similarities and differences that you have observed in your job and that of your supervisors? And what are the benefits of the differences in your graduate studies versus now here at Bayer?
Okay. So I guess first I'd like to go with the differences that I see between myself, my role as a technician, and my supervisors. And the biggest difference that I can think of right now is that my supervisors, they think of the project more long-term. And so they think of the whole year more or less at one time and what needs to happen, starting from crossing, what traits do we want to get in this cross and how, in 7 years are those traits going to be useful for us. And then my job from day to day is more getting those crosses done or getting the seed ready to plant it and things like that. So it's not quite as year-oriented or far-expansive, although I do like to think about it, but not that much because sometimes it does make my brain hurt. And then from a graduate student standpoint, trying to juggle all of the projects, thinking of how to start it and how to do it and getting the resources. As to where I am now, that's a good question. And I don't know if I have a real good answer for it. But there's a lot that goes into planning all of that. But even as my job is now, there's a lot of planning to make sure that you get your seed ready and shipping all the seed out. And it's still a long process. You get the protocol from your supervisor, which you had to come up with as a graduate student. But there's flexibility to get that protocol done that your supervisor has given you.
Okay. We have a couple questions that have come in. Let me expand that. From Case first. Job postings often cite a degree and some years of related experience. Can any of the years spent in graduate school doing related plant breeding projects count as your related experience? As someone who would be hiring, what are your feelings on that?
This is going to sound really ambiguous, but sometimes, I think. It depends on how much it relates and how deep that experience is. Sometimes if you have an internship or you're doing a different project that really applies, I think you can use that experience. Other times it's more learning skills, more basic skills, and then I'm a little less likely to count that as experience. Obviously it's valuable, but I think it just kind of depends on the person and what kinds of different experiences that they've had, which I know isn't that helpful, but I guess it's rather subjective.
Do you have anything?
I think it depends on the posting for the position. So if the posting, what I've seen in the Bayer hiring system anyway, is that there's almost a trade-off. A bachelor's degree with 12 years experience, a master's degree with 8 years experience, a PhD with 6 years experience. So in some sense, if you're applying for a position that requires a master's degree and you have a PhD, but you don't have 3 other years of experience, perhaps that 3 additional years of graduate study would be considered as experience in some sense. Obviously, a person who's been doing a PhD or has a longer period of graduate study would have more experience that would go along with that.
Okay. Let's talk about why you all ended up eventually, or somewhere along the line, choosing industry over academia. And we also have a question related to that. Why did you choose Bayer over another industry or another company? Is there something about the company that you like?
Controversial question.
Yes, controversial.
Well, I'll start. So I have always wanted to go into industry, even starting as a bachelor. I've always had this dream of industry. And I think industry has a more applicable, it reaches the growers, the farmers, the people that I grew up with, whereas academia, it focuses more on the nitty-gritty and how deeply you can get into knowing how something works. And that, I mean, it's interesting, but it's not where my heart lies to really know the cell process of something. But I want to be able to use what I did learn along the way to help the grower. So academia, and another point that I didn't want to go into academia is that there's a lot of grant writing, and I'm not a big fan of writing. So the grant writing and having to find money to fund yourself, and it often seems that the money goes to things that are in style, you know, what everybody else wants to be studying right now, which, you know, it may or may not interest me or whoever I'd be working with, but since that's where you can get your money and you need the money to do the research.
Janet?
Sure. So having made this transition, I think both Casey and I made this transition relatively recently, although I had been in a faculty position prior to taking this position, and it was a very difficult decision for me to make. But in the end, I think a lot of it came down to what was the end product that I wanted, and how did I want to spend my time. And I decided to consider industry. Even considering industry was a step for me, to say, well, what are the opportunities with industry? Because I saw myself in academia as a person. In a faculty role, your attention is really divided up into a lot of different areas that are related, but in a lot of ways very different. You have mentoring but you have similar things in industry as well, but in a little bit of a different way. So you have the mentoring role, you have the teaching role, you have the grant writing, you have the publications, you have probably some basic research that's going on, as well as your applied work with a breeding program. So as a breeder, the breeding component, even though it was very time consuming for me and something that I really was passionate about, it was not necessarily easy to balance with all the other responsibilities that I had, and I saw the plant breeding itself, and the applied work, as Casey had mentioned, to be very well fit with the position that I'm in at Bayer here, and wanting to develop the varieties and seeing that as the primary output that really gave me a lot of satisfaction. I think for other folks, if their satisfaction comes a lot from, you know, if you're publishing a lot of research and making a lot of groundbreaking breakthroughs that are in the new science, in new discoveries and things like that, that may provide somebody else a lot of satisfaction, or the teaching aspect may provide somebody a lot of satisfaction. Although I enjoyed those aspects, really for me, the plant breeding and the variety development was the driving, motivating factor for me.
And for me, when I finished school, I wanted a plant breeding position, and I applied for both academia positions and also industry positions. But the industry is what offered me a position first, and so I took it because I wanted that next step of a new position. And in hindsight, that was a really good move for me because I'm really not, I find writing very challenging, and so I would have really struggled with that aspect of academia. I always enjoyed the students and interacting with them, mentoring, but I find a lot of the mentoring and teaching aspect, I get to fulfill that role here at Bayer as well, because we're always, trying a new protocol, or how can we do this more efficiently, or, we're not on plan A or B anymore, but we're now to plan G and H, and so it's always something new, and so I really enjoyed that aspect of it, especially as we're getting this business off the ground. So it really turned out to be a good fit for me.
And I could also speak to the question about Bayer specifically, and it's not as though I was selecting Bayer amongst a lot of different other companies at the same time, but meeting the people at Bayer, for me, it was very, I had a lot of interest in being in a place where I had a really great team of people that I was going to work with. And so certainly people could find that in different places. I happen to have a good contact here at Bayer, and already knew Casey as well. And so already was really happy with the people I was going to be working with. And for me, having a good team and knowing Sally, now that I've gotten to know Sally better, I know that she's extremely team-oriented in terms of having a group of people that are working well together. And when you're working in such kind of close conditions, not necessarily always physically, but also with your projects, could be both, but overlapping so much with each other, being able to work well together makes a big difference. So.
I think this question is, maybe Sally would best be able to answer it. Are you able to retain a sense of continuity in your progression as a breeder through all of the company transfers that you've dealt with?
I can see where my skills have developed in certain areas at certain times. And so, one of the fun things about going back to school after I'd worked for a while was that I could really see the theory, take the theory in and apply it. And I was so excited for quite a while about that. The classes were just so much fun, and I really enjoyed that piece of it. And so then when you get out more, then you start to develop other skills. And now I'm not more in the day-to-day breeding types of activities, but I'm more in the long term of, setting up the stations and hiring the right people and trying to provide actually what I think a lot of my job is providing resources for the breeders, and so that they don't have to worry about certain things, but they can really think about breeding activities. How can we make sure that they have what they need in order to do the job? And the other thing I really enjoy is just our discussions in how can we do things more efficiently or more effectively? How can we get to where we want to be fast? And so I think that's another thing we look at a lot, trying to integrate this new team together.
Janet, do you kind of have the same experience of
the continuity? I guess I can't really speak to the continuity quite as much, because the thing that brought a lot of continuity for me earlier in my career was the subject matter. So I had a lot of continuity with the disease resistance that I was working on, and so that provided a lot of continuity from one position to the next. And moving to the Great Plains from Michigan has been the biggest change for me. Has been the biggest change for me, just changing quality classes and some different practices and things like that, and different pathogens and different risks and such. And so it's been exciting for me to develop that as a new as a new knowledge area for me. Developing my knowledge in wheat in the Great Plains versus what's going on the eastern side of the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going back to what you said, Sally, about going back into classes, things made a lot of sense. I know as I've taken plant breeding classes, a lot of the theory is pretty difficult to grasp, especially when you don't have that experience. And I was wondering, Casey, do you find that some of those concepts make more sense now, or you can see how the theory was applied in some of those plant breeding classes?
There are times, and there are, I see, applications where I try and make it make sense. Like I go back and think of my population genetics, and oh, why did we choose this many plants? Or I Punnett squares or the ratios. I write those down constantly. Try to keeping remembering them, and also just to apply it. So I'm always going back to it and refreshing myself and making it make sense. So that, yeah.
Okay, we've got a few questions about jobs that are available right now. So I think this is more industry in general. What kind of jobs are out there for students who are graduating with just a master's or are going all the way to graduating with a PhD?
Well, right now we have several wheat breeding positions open. You know, it just kind of depends as our business grows what we're adding onto. In the next few years, we'll be adding both of a mix of master's level and also PhD level. But you know, as well as some bachelor students too. You know, to really run programs, to run projects, supervise people. So it's hard to say. I think it really right now has been a great time for wheat in general because there are a lot of wheat positions as different companies have moved in and started up. There's been a lot of expansion into wheat opportunities. But I think in some of the other crops too that there's other places for people to go in industry at all the different levels.
In the same lines, this question is, as a graduating PhD student, in your search for a job, what would be key position titles or keywords that you would be looking for in finding a job posting that you feel you are advanced enough to take or be a good fit for the position?
It really depends on what the person wants to do and what their experience is to begin with. One of the things that I think has helped me in my career path has been that I've really enjoyed the field and I have made decisions that put me in place of being in the field a lot. And so that worked really well for me because then I ended up getting more field positions because I had experience with the field. And I would encourage people to really try to look for experiences if they don't feel like they're well qualified for maybe their dream job at this time, to look for short-term experiences, maybe a postdoc or other kinds of opportunities, internships that they could gain experience in the area that they really do love and maybe want to be able to develop into. I know that graduate studies can at times be so focused that you feel like you've learned a very specific set of skills and maybe you want to be able to broaden that. And postdocs are a really good opportunity for that as well. So,
Casey, what were you looking for when you graduated, or as you prepared to graduate?
As I prepared to graduate, so I graduated officially in August of 2011, and as you might remember, I started with Bayer in April of 2011, so I actually got a really big foot in the door before I even graduated, which it doesn't happen for everybody, and it lucked out, you know, in the right spot at the right time. But you know, I was looking for positions before the Bayer opportunity happened, and I was looking for field-oriented type positions. So you know, really field technicians, anything that would keep me outside and working with plants.
We have a question from Matthew, and he asks about if a student is debating the pros and cons of continuing on for a PhD versus stopping at a master's degree, using your company as an example, what degree is better for a long-term career?
I think it depends on what they want to do. What are they passionate about? You know, and where are they in their life? Because everybody's so unique that, you know, what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. And you know, if you want to run a program, then you usually need a PhD to do that. However, sometimes it's really nice to take a few years off and get that practical experience, and then go back into the classroom, just because of that mix of theory and applied knowledge. But I understand not everyone can do that, and some people don't want to take the time either. There is a time, you know, like a cost of time in your career for that. But and then I think in that case you can use postdocs then to enrich your experience, like Janet said, or perhaps an internship. We have a young man with us currently. He's been working for us since the 1st of June, and he will finish up in December and then go back to classes next spring. And so he's gotten, instead of just a 2 or 3 month block of time, he's actually invested about 6 months of his of time into learning about all these different plant breeding activities. And so I think that's really will give him a different wealth of experience to see kind of the whole picture that way.
I would agree with Sally. A lot depends on what, I think in a lot of respects, irrespective of the of whether or not we have PhD or masters, the three of us here all have a lot of responsibility, but the responsibility is different. And so depending on what the type of responsibility the person wants and thinks that they would enjoy dealing with on a day-to-day basis, that would probably influence a lot whether a PhD would be more appropriate or a master's level would be more appropriate.
Okay. We also have a question about advantages and disadvantages of being a public breeder or an industry breeder. What have your experiences been? Janet, would you like to start?
Sure. Well, one of the challenges that is faced today by public breeders that wasn't something that they had to consider so much in the past, especially in the wheat breeding circumstances, is sharing germplasm with each other. And there have been a lot of modifications with material transfer agreements. As a grad student, I really didn't know much of anything about this. I didn't hear about this, but as I became a professor, this became a central issue. It wasn't at the beginning of my faculty position, and it became more and more of an issue as we went along. And as the public industry is getting more involved in plant breeding, I think those things, that's becoming more into the front, that's becoming at the forefront of people's minds, is how do we share germplasm? And that's becoming both a public and a private company issue. With the public institutions, depending on the institution that the person's at, that institution may have more or less of a focus on the germplasm that you're trying to work with. And something that was attractive to me on a private industry circumstance is that I knew that this was a major focus of the company overall. And so the support would be there for getting the germplasm, doing what I needed to do with the germplasm, hopefully, but at the same time, the restrictions would be very, probably more clearly enforced. Whereas in the public institutions, you're a single professor working on trying to do these germplasm exchanges, and you have support from an office at the university, I would say, most of the time. And they're becoming more and more familiar with this idea of wheat and transfer of wheat, but it wasn't something that they had a lot of experience with 15, 20 years ago. So that's one of the things that comes to mind. I don't think it necessarily answers your question, but it is a major issue these days, sharing germplasm.
Okay, Dina has a good question here, talking about, for those of you who can't see, Dina's in the back of the room, making sure things run correctly. So at the beginning, we talked a lot about needing soft skills, but we didn't really answer anything about how to get those skills. So do you guys have any ideas of maybe what you thought you could have done as a graduate student or a professor or in any of your jobs to improve your skills? Well, here we have Matthew has added that the panel could maybe comment on the value of being in committees, student organizations, and other types of involvement. Would you like to start, Casey?
So Matthew kind of touched on it, is be more proactive in committees and in different groups. Your local agronomy group or something like that, which, I never really got into those kinds of things. And, hindsight's always 100%, but yeah, I should have, looked to be more involved with different groups and assumed more leadership positions than I could have.
It's probably a misunderstanding on the part of a lot of graduate students, unfortunately. You have to change your mentality at some point in graduate studies from I'm doing this all myself and I'm going to control every aspect of this to how do I effectively delegate things that's not necessary for me to do, that somebody else can do, and so that I can work on the things that really only I can do. And I think learning to make that transition mentally is very helpful. As a graduate student, I was very fortunate that early in my graduate studies, I started being part of the hiring process to hire in temporary workers, evaluating people, calling references, and then working with them, helping to train them, developing their schedules. And as some of you may know, the first time you start doing this, it can be really overwhelming. You feel like you spend your entire day just trying to figure out somebody else's schedule. And it's really like, you feel like you get nothing done. And really, the more you advance in your career, the more you're able to kind of hand off things that somebody with less knowledge or fewer skills, the more you're able to hand those things off to other people, on a financial level, on an academic level, this makes a lot of sense. And that's what I used to think about in terms of when I used to, work at various places. If I can get somebody working at $10 an hour to do this, it makes a lot more sense for whoever I'm working for, who's paying me a lot more money than a $10 an hour worker. If I can hand off a bunch of stuff to a $10 an hour worker who can do the job really well, that makes a lot more, that's a much better investment time-wise for whoever I'm working for.
Do you have anything to add, Sally, about how students can gain some soft skills while still in school?
I think Casey and Janet have touched on a lot of it. I think another avenue people can use is an organization called Toastmasters. just to work on their public speaking skills and being comfortable talking in front of people. You know, I did that the last year I was a PhD student, gave a speech about every month. And, you know, I think that's something that really helps you just get more comfortable with just talking to people and just taking some leadership. You know, just volunteering for different leadership positions. You know, somebody to run the agronomy club, or somebody to do the journal club, or, you know, writing protocols, leaving instructions on how you do different methods. I think those are all important things that students could perhaps put into place. Just to, kind of as they move on, you know, that way the next person doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. And it also gives them some really valuable experience.
Okay. I think that really covers most of the questions that we had sent in previously. Is there anything? We've got about 10 minutes left, so if anyone in the audience still has questions, please go ahead and type those in. And I don't know if you guys have any other comments, maybe something you felt we could have touched on but didn't.
I think something that comes to mind, we were writing down like our thoughts on paper before it was old technology, right? So, and I wrote down this idea of, you know, communicating with your peers is something you want to take advantage of when you're in grad school. Take advantage of the opportunity to communicate with the peers around you, having them talking through your ideas, research-wise, developing soft skills, things like that. Learning from each other, it's very valuable time. You have a lot of people, other students around you. It's a good time to be able to do that. And having other people challenging your ideas is really valuable. Once you get into another position, especially if you're in industry, you know, you have to do it the best way you can. And so having had that experience of talking with each other and bouncing ideas off and coming to the best conclusion you can is very useful. So.
One thing I thought of, just as we finish up here too, is one thing in industry that seems to be, I know, really important, and I know it's important within a project. You know, when I was at CSU, we were a team, but actually, also when you're out in industry, you're really part of a larger team. So, you know, people report to me, and I report to others, and so there's a whole focus. And so you have to be pretty flexible and learn how to communicate so that you know you can understand what's going on, where people are coming from above you, and to then also communicate it to people that who report to you, so everybody's kind of stays on the same page. And I think that's, you know, something else that don't always think about the larger team that's involved in some of these research units. Which I think is important. You know, as we go forward, we try to really keep a close, tight team together. I think team dynamics are really important.
We have one last question here that I think will wrap it up in a fun way. It is, what do you wish someone had told you before you started your first industry job?